Welcome to the Unlist. This is the promised video where I would do an unspooling of my favorite Calvin Klein fragrances, the official Calvin Klein Unlist for 2024. I may not do one next year because I don't know if my favorites are going to change unless they introduce something new or I pick up an older thing that I didn't have before, which is unlikely. I think I'm more or less done buying Calvin Klein fragrances at this point in my so-called fragrance journey. I think I have all the ones I'll ever want to have, but I could be proven wrong, so let's not say that with any certainty. Now, recapping my previous Calvin Klein video where I discussed the house and its history, I mentioned how it becomes a big no-no for online fragrance enthusiasts, and it's because they mash up two very disparate concepts together. They take the abstract, high art, high concept fragrance style, like a Byredo, like an MFK, and then they mash it with an accessible price point and an overall commercial zeal with the advertising, the marketing, the names of the fragrances, the bottle shapes. So they have this futuristic, cyberpunky, avant-garde, abstract style of fragrance with no pyramids that give you absolute nonsense like rain accord and wet cobblestone and dewy grass and elf farts and angel whispers and whatever. Okay, they do that, which is something you would expect a really expensive brand to do, right? Like a $300, $400 per bottle brand would do some kind of nonsense like that. But then on the other hand, they're selling you Macy's level, designer level fragrances that smell like they still have a mass appeal lean to them. Even if they're not 100% mass appeal, they're never like full Sauvage or full Bleu de Chanel or full any of that stuff. They're somewhere in the gray area, right? They have just enough mass appeal to sell themselves, right? To actually be appealing for people to buy them. But they still have enough high art, highbrow sort of conceptualism with their overall aesthetic. And that's a crossover that most snobs and most pinkies out types, they can't get with that. They don't want their MFK and their Kenneth Cole to cross streams, right? They don't want Maison Kenneth Cole. They don't want that. They don't want MKC. They want one or the other. And Calvin Klein has always been in that uncanny valley, so to speak. They've always been in that middle ground since the 80s. And even though a lot of people who don't give two shits about any of this online collection nonsense, they're not on Fragrantica, they're not on Base Notes, the average person loves Calvin Klein. And Calvin Klein has sold lots of fragrances over the decades. You get into that nerdy headspace with those very vocal minority people that spend all their time blogging or doing videos, and they just can't abide that particular combination. It's crossing the streams, right? Okay? It's no. Unless you're someone like me who's very irreverent and doesn't care about decorum, doesn't care about propriety, any concept of snobbery is just like, no. We're not doing the social class thing with our fragrances. We have enough of that already with the price point. So now, my favorites. Let's get right on down to it. Go back and watch the full video if you want to learn the history. This is just the perfumes themselves, okay? So obviously, I mentioned in my history video that I wasn't the biggest fan of the original men's fragrance, which was called Calvin from 1981. I do have a bottle. I've got a mini as well. So I've got a bottle from the 1999 reissue, a big bottle, and then I've got a smaller, it's not a mini, it's just a 1 ouncer. It's not an actual mini. It's a bigger bottle, but it's only a 1 ounce bottle. And I've got that of the deep vintage when it was Minnetonka. So I've got the 1 ounce Minnetonka, and then I've got the more recent Unilever reissue from the 90s. There is no Coty version. Coty has never put the fragrance out. When Coty bought Calvin Klein in 2006, that fragrance was not one of the ones that survived, that made it over. So who knows? Probably because it's so much unlike all the rest. But one of the reasons why I don't particularly care for Calvin all that much is it's too conventional. It's very much of that musky, early 80s powerhouse fougere style, and they're just better options. There were better things out at that time, especially in 81, man. You had Antaeus, you had Koros, Oscar de Laurentiis Pour Louis. You had stuff like Bogart One Man Show. You had Van Cleef and Arpels Pour Homme. You just had so many better things that you could spend your money on in that style. You didn't need Calvin. Calvin was almost a throwaway, really. And you can tell because the brand quickly moved beyond it, very quickly. Once they established Obsession, which is one of my favorite Calvin Kleins, by the way, once they established Obsession for men in '86, Calvin was basically discontinued. It was gone. So, yeah, stock of it remained on shelves for a while, but it was not being made anymore. Obsession and Obsession for Men became the big flagship fragrances for Calvin Klein going forward. From that point forward. The reason why I like Obsession so much is the fact that it takes a amber / oriental style and it polishes it so smooth and so clean and so sheen and shiny like a sphere. I describe it, and I believe I described it in that previous video, as like a chrome sphere, like those things from the movie Phantasm that have the blades on that fly through the air, and they just drill your head out and stuff. I kind of picture that thing is powered by Obsession. Like someone cracks that open, fills it with Obsession perfume, and it closes it back up, and it sends it off to drill more brains out, because it just has this strong, heavy-hitting musk spice combination with lavender and amber, but then it has so much shine and polish, so much just absolute reflection, seeing your reflection in it, polish to it. It's ridiculous amounts of polish. It makes it probably the friendliest amber of its type. If you're going to wear any kind of 80s heavy amber fragrance, right, anything that's got a big, heavy, fat dose of musky amber in it, Obsession is going to be the only one, and I do mean the only one, you're going to be able to pull off in an office environment. Less sprays, obviously. You don't want to go heavy on it, but 1 or 2 shots of that, and you can get away with it. And many guys did. It became the scent of, like, the boss. Any manager in a retail environment or middle floor walker in a office environment was rocking the Obsession in the 80s and 90s. It was kind of the successful older gentleman sort of go-getter, you know, I'm successful, get in my car, right, sort of thing. It eventually got like a bit of a sleazy connotation later on as it aged a little bit, but in those earlier years it was very much that middle manager for the local newspaper kind of a fragrance. And, you know, teachers wore it a lot too. A lot of my teachers growing up in the 80s had the Obsession on. So a very, very, very popular fragrance. Eternity is also one of my favorites, and of course, surprise, surprise, it is one of the fragrances I grew up smelling. It is literally the Fresh Fougere. It is the Fresh Fougere that established the Fresh Fougere style for the next 30 years, okay? Everything after Eternity didn't smell like Drakkar, didn't smell like Duc de Vervins, didn't smell like Azzaro Pour Homme. Everything after Eternity smelled like Eternity, and for good fucking reason. Paco Rabanne XS, Platinum Egoist by Chanel, okay? All of those, right, smelled in one shape or another similar to Eternity for Men. Right on up through to Curve, and in early 2000s, you still had fragrances being made that smelled like Eternity, okay? Sexual Pour Homme by Michel Germain, Abercrombie and Fitch Fierce Cologne, Mont Blanc Legend, Parfums de Marley Percival. All of these have a lineage going all the way back to Eternity for Men. It is just that perfectly inoffensive, clean, well-rounded, just complex enough to be interesting, but just innocuous enough to not get you in trouble unless you're an oversprayer, of course. The main trick with that fragrance is it takes the Fougere Accord and strips it of all of the natural elements, suspends it within a wall of artificialness, which is, of course, again, anathema. It's kryptonite for the snobs, but the lavender, the geranium, the tonka is sandwiched between linalool, dihydramyrosinol, and all these other chemicals. So it's like a synthetic Fougere sandwich. And it has just enough natural smell, so you go, okay, Fougere, but just enough of that synthetic, again, that polish, that abstract feel to it, that it puts it in a strange, futuristic, Star Trek world, and it would become a gold standard for that particular style. So, love it or hate it, I don't care. One of my favorites. Carlos Benaim did a good job with this fragrance. Same guy who composed Polo. Two equal opposite fragrances. The guy who produced Polo produced this scent. Now you move into the 90s. Okay, Escape is all right. I feel like the Escape style was done better with New West 5 years earlier. Harry Fremont made New West for Aramis. Escape by Steve DeMarcado. Escape for Men was really a retread of New West, in my opinion. So I kind of skip over that one. I own a bottle of it, but it's just like a worse New West, so I don't really wear it all that much. CK1. CK1 really deserves its own video, and I will probably give it its own video, but for right now, I will say that I do wear CK1. CK1 has a lot of history, culturally and perfumer-wise. Harry Fremont and Alberto Morillas composed that together with each other, and it is recognized as the first marketed unisex fragrance. Many fragrances were unisex by default before that. Stuff that was just not gendered. It just wasn't gendered, so it was unisex. But with CK1, they made it a point to advertise that it was a shared fragrance. And that was probably a bigger deal than the actual smell. More than the actual fragrance itself was the marketing behind it, which sort of made it what it is. And it needs its own video, so I will leave it at that. I do like it. It's a very clean, floral, white musk fragrance with a nice, slight green tea note in there, buried underneath all the hedione and other materials. There's a little bit of green tea in there. It's really nice. A lot of other brands would copy it. Whether or not they were unisex, okay? They weren't always unisex, but a lot of other brands copied it, all right? Very common. Versace the Dreamer is kind of like what you would get if you mixed CK1 with Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, right? Hannah Moret would do a fragrance very similar to CK1. Paco Rabanne would have Paco, very similar to CK1. Even Jovan got into it with its Ginseng NRG, which is another similar scent to the CK1. Just kept going like that, right? We even have fragrances today that smell like CK1, just much more expensive. Like, let me give you an example. The Cosmoratti fragrance by Xerjoff, the original Cosmoratti, not the Fiero or any of the other ones. Mephisto, that's what it is. Cosmoratti, Mephisto. Mephisto smells like a very expensive CK1. I know you Cosmoratti fans are going to hate me for saying that because you spent $300 on your bottle, but I don't give a shit how much you spent. It smells like expensive CK1 to me, and I would rather wear CK1 than spend that kind of money on Mephisto. It's ridiculous. There. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it for all I care. CKB came out a few years later. I like it. It's kind of weird. It tries to do the whole fougere thing, unisex. So the knee-jerk reaction from CK1 is that it was too feminine for some guys. I don't think so, but it was too feminine for some guys. So they hired someone to make CKB and try to make it a little more on the masculine side while still being unisex. So we got a fougere with a bit of a peach and fig top note. And that peach fig top note gave it a fruity twist that would make it more appealing, I guess, to women while still being a barbershop style. So when I smell CKB, it reminds me of like an LGBT barbershop fragrance. And since I am, a queer man myself, I can appreciate that. It's that barbershop fougere, that man, woman, pronouns irregardless, they, them, anybody can wear this and feel like they just got their hair cut, like they just got cleaned up, like they just got a shave. So if you want that basically gender-free experience, but still barbershop, traditional barbershop, but gender-free, CKB has got your name all over it. And it came out 28 years ago, right? Very ahead of the curve. Good fragrance. Now, 1999, we would see Contradiction come out. Contradiction is also one of my favorites because Contradiction was basically a green aromatic fragrance, but inverted. right? Most people think that green aromatic scents have to be heavy and mossy and full of pine and full of tobacco and full of all of these really heavy, dank, petrichor, however you say it, kind of materials, swampy, dark, woody, mossy, feel like you're in Mirkwood, like you're in Lord of the Rings, right? But not contradiction. Contradiction is literally like it sounds. It is a contradiction of itself. You get all these fresh, sweet, clean notes in the opening, but then as it dries down, you get a very resinous, sort of balmy, a little bit mossy, but very smooth, clean experience that mixes with the juniper, the sage, the lavender, all the things that make it green, right? But then once you get into that base, you get a very novel material for its time. See, that's the thing. Calvin Klein has always been into using novel synthetics. Linalool was heavily abused by Obsession, okay? The hydromercenol and linalool, heavily abused by Eternity. Escape was a Kalone bomb, big old Kalone bomb in Escape. CK1 was all about Hedione High Cis, which was a variation of Hedione at the time. It was brand new, so Hedione High Cis. And then, you get Cashmeran in the contradiction. Cashmeran is now a very common material. It's used to create a fuzzy sort of fur coat, kind of musky smell. If you overdose it, it can get a bit scratchy, a bit weird, a bit ambery, but when used in appropriate amounts, it kind of gives you this clean, smooth musk material that can sometimes impart leather depending on how you play with it, depending on what you put next to it. You can get like a suede out of it. But that's not how it's used in the contradiction, though. It's not used that way there. A little bit further forward, we see Truth. Truth was actually a double release. You had Crave and Truth come out side by side. Crave is lusted after by collectors because it was only on the market for a year or two and then it got discontinued. It came in a fully plastic bottle that looks like a photon torpedo right out of Star Trek. And it had a very garishly bright, sour, tart, sort of candy, ozonic smell that I don't think is very attractive. Even back in the day when it came out, I didn't find it very attractive. But whatever. People want things when they can't have them. So discontinued. Collectors will tell you it's a masterpiece. But to me, it just smells like hairspray. If you think hairspray is a masterpiece, let me just sell you a can of Aquanet and call it a day, all right? Save you some money. Truth, on the other hand, is kind of interesting because it was the more mature fragrance released at the same time, 2002. Whereas Crave was for the 18, 25-year-olds, the Truth was for the 26 on up to 40-year-olds. And it was designed to be a similar concept. It had some ozonic notes to it, okay? It had some transparent aldehydic materials up top. But it was much more of a violet leaf and lavender fragrance. So if you're a fan of things like Eau de Cartier Concentré, if you're a fan of things like Burberry Touch, okay, you like those kind of fragrances with the violet lavender duo, right? If you like that, then I think you will very much like Truth. Truth, slanted bottle, stands pretty weird, but it has a nice sort of pseudo-aqueous aquatic fern accord, a little bit of oak moss in there, not a ton, but a little bit of oak moss, but it really is all about the violet and lavender combination. That's what you're buying it for. So if that sounds good to you, then get you some. It's very nice. I like Euphoria, the original Euphoria for men, not a popular choice among collectors, once again. It has a very strange sort of fruity, musky kind of thing. It kind of almost has this sort of red berry sort of deal with it. I don't want to quite say like a sour sort of candy berry flavor, but then it mixes with musks. It's almost like a extremely abstract, and I mean very abstract, interpretation of what was going on with Abercrombie and Fitch and Kenneth Cole and all those brands. But it is such a weird fragrance, yet also very pleasant. And it had not one, not two, not three, but 4 perfumers work on it. Because Calvin Klein was a fan of taking all the perfumers that applied for a brief and putting them all together. Rather than make one winner and multiple losers, if Calvin Klein put a brief out and a perfumer won the brief, it was their idea, but then all the losers joined in too. So it's like, okay, all of you are technically winners, okay? You win, so it's your idea, but the rest of you can join in and all of you can shape this together. So you'll find a lot of Calvin Klein perfumes, whether it's Givalden or IFF, whoever wins the brief, right? It's a whole gaggle of perfumers working on it. It's like 3 to 4 perfumers. And that's what it was with Euphoria. And it's a very interesting fragrance. I actually quite enjoy it. Much beyond that, though, things get a little bit weird because Anne Gottlieb walked away. And when Anne Gottlieb walked away, their art direction went, whew. So things got a little bit dicey. But some of those latter era, post-2006, the Coty era, basically, some of those Coty era Calvin Kleins are actually okay, right? So one of the last ones from the Anne Gottlieb era that I do like is the CK1 Scene from 2005. It's a very interesting ginger white floral. So if you ever wanted to know what maybe Kouros smelled like without the animalic component, like take Kouros and remove the Cinnarome animalis from it, add in ginger, make it a bit more based out. You know, Artemisia, are you a fan of Artemisia? Do you like wormwood? So yeah, just take Kouros, add in wormwood, add in ginger, take out the animal accord, and that is CK1 Scene. Very good stuff. But past that, though, a bit dicey. I wasn't real big on Encounter, okay? Wasn't real big on CK Free. I didn't even buy Free. I just skipped Free completely. All right. All the flankers also began coming around this time. They really began to abuse flankers. Once Coty came on board, Coty picked up the ball. It was like summer this, summer that, gold this, fire, water, aqua, wind, now, then, the next day, the day before, the day after. All these stupid flankers. You just blew up the counters. So a lot of that stuff kind of gets by me. I don't pay attention to it. But that said, I do like Reveal from 2014. So Reveal is probably one of the last of the more recent Calvin Kleins I like because Reveal is like a fruity vetiver fragrance. And the bottle looks like a chiclet, a big piece of chewing gum. So it looks like a giant chiclet, and the cap comes off. This thing must weigh like 5 pounds. The glass is so solid, so heavy. But the scent, it's like kiwi and kumquat, and it's got mastic in it. So if you like mastic, anything like that, if you like that kind of sort of smell, and then vetiver, very, very nutty, warm bourbon vetiver. It's not Haitian vetiver. It's not Javanese. It's a very nutty, warm, like Guerlain-esque. If you like that Guerlain-esque vetiver, that's there. It's got amber notes. It's got that fruitiness. It's a very strange, like jungle, fruity, tropical, warm, ambery vetiver. And you would think that sucks. That doesn't sound like it smells good. But it actually does. It works really surprisingly well. And that's why I implore you to give Reveal Men a try. Men, mind you, not the women's one. I don't know what that one smells like. Then last but not least, top this all off, a couple of things I like. I was a really big fan of the CK2. Big hate train on that fragrance, though. A lot of people hated it, but very dry, almost grayscale kind of rose, very colorless rose. The fragrance with the wet cobblestone notes in it is CK2, by the way. But again, misunderstood. If you like Declaration d'un Soir, which is discontinued, I think you would like this. If you like Thé Noir 29 by Le Labo, okay, if you like that fragrance, again, I think you will like this. If you're a fan of Toy Boy, any of these more recent, more modern, like rose fragrances that are marketed to men or unisex, if you're a fan of any of those, especially the Declaration. If you love the Declaration, CK2 is right up your alley. And that's it, guys. Those are my favorite CKs. Catch you next time.